November, IIP has contracted by over 2%. There was expectation it will grow at over 1%. So this is really, really bad news, because if you actually see the numbers up till October, the IIP growth has been dismal. It has been nil, it has been zero, and that has contracted by over 2%. Also to tell our viewers, manufacturing growth has contracted as well by over 3.5%. Again, the expectations was that it will grow at 1.6%. Mining has contracted too. I want those numbers on our screens right now. November IIP at minus 2.1% versus 1.8% of a contraction that one did see in October. Electricity, and that's another, manufacturing again, like we just told you, has contracted by 3.5%. Let's also pull up the other data that's coming in right now. And I am going to go to our guests very shortly. April to November IIP has seen a contraction of 0.2%. It has contracted by 0.2 of a percentage point. Till October, the data was 0%. And if you actually see from April to November, so all through this fiscal, IIP has only contracted. The ET Now poll was talking about a growth of 1.1%. Instead of that, IIP has actually contracted by over 2%. Manufacturing has been rather dismal, which really makes up the big component of IIP. It has contracted by 3.5% versus a contraction of 2%. Sure enough. Hold your thoughts, sir, because I will take it across to Maithili Pusnurmat, who's joining us right here in our Delhi studio. Maithili, thanks very much for being with us. This is a number that nobody had expected, from a range of 0.6 of a percentage point contraction to a growth of 1.1%. This is very dismal. It's gone down by over 2% for the month of November. And from April to November, IIP is actually contracted by 0.2 of a percentage point.
Well, certainly very disappointing numbers, because till October we'd seen April to November, static at 0%, and was hopeful that if November shows a positive number, we will see some signs of industrial growth in the financial year so far. But clearly that has not happened. So very disappointing numbers, particularly in the case of manufacturing, because a decline of 3.5% is clearly bad news, not just for the economy and for growth, but also more crucially for employment. And for a government which got elections staring at its face, it really is very worrisome.
All right. It's brand news as far as employment is concerned, and you're right. There is chronic joblessness that one is staring at the Indian economy. Bad news for the ruling party that goes into elections. But let's keep politics aside for a moment, Maithili, and let me also discuss that particular number that we spoke about. Yes, November IIP has contracted by over 2%. I'm actually waiting for more internal details to come in. We only have manufacturing right now, which has contracted by over 3.5% versus a 2% contraction in the previous month, actually in the previous year. But if I were to just ask you very quickly, in November last year, when these numbers were reported, it was said that the low numbers were on account of the number of holidays there were. There was Diwali and there was everything else around. This year, what is the excuse?
Well, this year again we saw Diwali fall in November. The only difference was that last year it happened, I think, on the 13th of November. This time we saw Diwali on the 3rd of November. But Diwali was followed soon after, it was followed by Eid. So I think we had a number of fewer, the working days were fewer in November. So that perhaps is one reason. But that really cannot explain a decline of 3.5. So clearly there is a much greater contraction in manufacturing. Industry is not so hopeful. There's less investment happening. I really would like to see what's happened to capital goods in the month, because capital goods, as we know, has been very volatile throughout this year. So that clearly is, the government has more than enough reason to worry. And if we see, of course, I think there is a hope that inflation possibly will not disappoint. But if IIP is disappointed, now I'm getting a little wary that will inflation also disappoint? Because mind you, we were expecting some improvement in IIP numbers. Likewise, we are expecting an improvement in inflation numbers also. So if that also disappoints, we clearly are in for hard times.